That was huge. That was a big strike. G'day, Glenn Martin Photography here, and right now I've got an active storm outside my window with lots of lightning going on. So this video, I'm going to show you how to use an exposure trigger to better your chances of capturing that amazing strike. Let's get started because this thing is going on right now. We do have on top of my camera a MIOPS smart device. This one's actually been discontinued, but MIOPS have a number of other triggers available that you can go and check out, link below. First thing we're going to do is get the camera turned on. And I'm not going to turn the trigger on just yet because I need to set the camera for the ambient light. So you want to get the camera set up in manual mode and adjust it so that your exposure meter bar is set right to the middle. Now at the moment my meter bar is right off to the side because there was actually another storm last night, and as you can see there I got down to 2.5 second exposures. So I'm actually going to, oh there was a strike, come on, we've got to get this set up. So I just got to get this set so that the exposure is near enough in the middle, which you can see here is giving us 1/30th of a second. We're at f2.8 at the moment. I'm wide open. I'm not sure how strong the strikes are. And my ISO is set manually to 100. Glenn from the future here. In my haste to set up for that storm, I set my initial aperture to f2.8. Now this is normally not where you'd set it. You'd usually want to be at more f5.6 or f8. The reason is at f2.8 you're really wide open and you run a very real risk of just blowing out the scene when a lightning strike does hit. So what you'll do at f5.6 or f8, hopefully you're going to get a couple of strikes, do a quick review on the back of your camera and just see, is the lightning still nice and visible, or is it nearly disappearing or almost blowing out? So you can adjust your aperture here to suit. And one of the benefits of closing your aperture down to f5.6 or f8, it also means you can extend your shutter time. So you can have your shutter open for longer, which is going to increase your chances of capturing strikes, especially a full strike where it is crawling across the sky. But I've actually got something coming up a little later in this video explaining how we can stitch multiple exposures together in the event that you're using short exposures. Anyway, back to Storm Glenn. So now that we can see that the exposure is correct, I'm also going to get a focus on the buildings in the distance. Let's just zoom that out a little bit. So making sure I've got focus, and now I'm going to set the camera to manual focus so it doesn't try to readjust later. All right, and now let's get the trigger turned on. Just give that a little, oh my gosh. I don't know if we saw that on there, but because I'm still setting up, the camera didn't go off. So now I've got to go into the MIOPS app and set the sensitivity of the trigger. So let's get going. So I'm using the MIOPS mobile app because that's the right one for this little trigger. It's searching for the devices. There we go, it's found it. Let's get connected. So we're going to scroll down to the lightning setting, hit that, and let's just get it started. Our little MIOPS, oh, there we go, it's starting to go off. But the flashing green means that it's received the data to know the sensitivity to use for the lightning. Now, once you've got everything set up, if you're not too sure if the trigger is actually firing or detecting a change in exposure, you can actually use the light on your phone. Chances are your phone has a torch, so just put it in front of the trigger. There we go. We can hear it firing off so that we know the trigger is working, it's going to activate the camera. Oh, that was straight out there. So when you use one of these lightning triggers, you saw that my sensitivity is at 99. So that's really high. Sometimes you can start actually getting false positives having such a high sensitivity. And I'll give the camera a little moment. If it starts going a bit too crazy, I'll turn that sensitivity down. And that storm, oh, did you see that? There we go, nice one. Let's have a preview on the back. We don't want to touch the camera for too long. No, just a flash. So we didn't actually get anything in that. Must have been up in the clouds. You want to try and touch the camera as little as possible, by the way, because guaranteed the moment that you touch the camera, a strike happens and you introduce camera shake. Touch the camera and a strike happens almost every time. Now it is firing off a bit too regular for my liking, so I'm going to turn the sensitivity down a little bit. Oh, what was that? Do we get it? So what's not obvious in this app, to try and get out of the current setting that I'm in, it's on screen. You've got to tap once and tap twice to remove it. So now I can drop my sensitivity down. I'm going to do it to 80. We're going to set that, and that command has now gone to the trigger, so hopefully it's not going to take as many false positives as before. So when it detects a change in exposure, but it's actually not a lightning strike. Now the thing with the sensitivity of the triggers, the other night my camera took about 300 shots, but of those there was only a little more than a dozen that actually had lightning in them, and that was after I turned down the sensitivity a bit. So if you're too high, you can actually end up with thousands of photos, and now you have to sift through them to find the action. So other settings that we want for lightning photography. My camera is set to manual focus, f2.8, ISO 100. Other key settings is we've got, oh, did you see that one? Did we actually get something there? Let's have a look. Oh, just out of frame. It was all up in the top there. So we're set to high-speed continuous shooting. This is handy when you've got shorter exposures like I do at the moment of 1/30th of a second. If there's a slow crawler across the sky, it'll take multiple shots and I'll be able to stitch that in post. Here's an example of what I'm talking about from the other night with 3 images, and you can see the lightning is in different positions each time. My white balance is set to cloudy. I shoot in RAW, so I don't really have to set my white balance, but it just helps me preview what the shot is going to look like in camera. And that's the usual suspects that you'll be looking at when setting up your camera for lightning photography. As the light changes, check your exposure by giving a little half press. So right now I'm actually overexposed by a stop. I'm in RAW, that's not going to be too bad. I should be able to pull it back, but what I'm going to do is just close down my aperture just a little to f4 to reduce that stop back to a normal exposure. So when you're setting your aperture, one of the considerations is how far away the strikes are and how large in the sky. Now, if it's quite a ways off in a distance, you might need to open your aperture up to f4, f2.8 if your lens will cope. As the storm starts getting closer, assuming that you're safe, you can actually close down your aperture a bit to 5.6 or maybe even a little more, and that will make sure that when the lightning strikes, you don't get a blown out scene and you get nice crisp strikes instead of sort of fat, indistinct ones. All the while that you're doing this, you just need to make sure that you're checking your ambient exposure, so how the camera is exposing for a normal scene, so you can ensure that you're not overexposing or underexposing the image. Glenn from the future again. Okay, a quick explanation about why I keep referring to exposing for the lightning with your aperture, as well as exposing for the ambient light, the scene, the landscape. So lightning photography is very much like flash photography. There's 2 exposures that are happening. Normally with a flash, you'll dial in the camera to handle the ambient light, so the amount of light that is in the scene without any assistance from a flash. And then there's the second exposure when the actual flash goes off, not unlike lightning. So even though changing the aperture can change how bright or how thick or thin the lightning is, by having a longer exposure, it doesn't make the lightning any brighter. So with the aperture, if the hole goes larger, it's going to let more light in. The hole goes smaller, it's going to let less light in. Now for lightning, that will only strike in a fraction of a second. That size of the hole in your aperture can have a big effect on the brightness of the lightning. As far as the foreground though, the landscape, the ambient lighting, when we adjust the aperture, we also adjust our shutter speed to make sure the shutter is open long enough to allow the landscape to be properly exposed. If it is a very long exposure, the lightning is only there for mere moments. So you can see in these two examples where the first shot, the exposure time is 20 seconds because it's the middle of the night and I needed it to be long enough to give me enough foreground ambient light. Whereas this one was during the day and the shutter speed is 1/5 of a second. So it's a mere fraction of the 20-second one. And as you can see side by side, the lightning hasn't blown out monumentally or washed out the image in the 20-second one because it's a flash, just like a strobe. Anyway, I hope that helps. Let's go back to Storm Glenn. He doesn't have long to go. So of course, now that So the camera's obviously still firing off at 80% sensitivity. There's cars down in the distance there, and it's probably their headlights which are setting off the smart trigger. Oh, there we go. Let's see what we got out of that. Oh, that got a bit exciting. Did we get anything? We did, but it was just out of frame off to the side there. That's one of the challenges of lightning photography. So at the moment I've got a fairly wide lens on. It's my 16 to 35 millimeter and it's set to about 28 millimeter at the moment because I feel like the storm's getting off into the distance. The challenge is the tighter you zoom, Murphy's Law, the strikes will happen outside your field of view. But then as you go wider and wider to try and capture more action, ultimately it can start looking a lot smaller than what you're experiencing with your own eyes. So naturally, once I get all of this set up, it looks like tonight's storm might be petering out. Now I'm going to leave my camera here just in case more action happens because I have had storms which look like have stopped for 10 minutes and then have gotten massive strikes at the very end. So if you're there watching the storm and feeling like maybe there's lightning, maybe there's not, get your camera set up and recording because there's the strike that you see but you don't capture, you're going to be most upset about. Hope you found this useful. Now get out there and shoot something amazing.